Everyone assumes that living past 90 is mostly about luck, good genes maybe, being born into the right family, not getting the wrong diagnosis at the wrong moment. And to be fair, genetics does play a role, but if you look at the actual research, decades of longitudinal studies tracking thousands of people from middle age all the way into their 9th and 10th decades, what you find is something genuinely surprising. Genetics accounts for less than 25% of how long most people live. That number comes from some of the most rigorous twin studies ever conducted, published in journals like Nature Genetics. And it means that the other 75%, the vast majority of your lifespan, is shaped by what you do, what you eat, how you move, how you sleep, and how you manage the hidden biological processes running quietly in the background of your body right now. But here is where it gets important. The habits that produce a 95-year-old who still walks unaided, still thinks clearly, still has relationships worth living for, those habits are not what the wellness industry has been selling you. They are not morning smoothies and meditation apps and expensive supplements. They are a specific set of biological behaviors that work through mechanisms most people have never heard about. And most people will never adopt them, not because they are hard, but because nobody has explained the science behind why they work. That is what this video is going to do. We are going to go through 8 habits that consistently appear in people who live past 90. And for each one, I am going to explain the exact biological mechanism, the cellular and hormonal pathway that makes it work. Because when you understand the why, the what becomes obvious. Hi, I am Dr. Alex. I am an emergency medicine doctor, and after nearly 10 years working in AA&EE, I have seen what happens when preventable disease is not prevented. I have watched people in their 60s arrive in ways they should not have, strokes that robbed them of language, heart failures that took their independence, cognitive decline that took everything else. And what I have come to understand very clearly is that most of those outcomes were not inevitable. They were the end result of decades of biology going wrong in ways that could have been interrupted. My goal now is to help people understand the science early enough to change the outcome. Not just live longer, but live better, with function, independence, and cognitive clarity intact. If you are watching this video, you are probably thinking seriously about your health and your future. And I want to take just a few seconds here to make you a promise. I promise to keep creating the most helpful videos I possibly can, grounded in science and the latest research, to help you live longer and stay healthier as you age. All I ask in return is that you give this channel a chance and hit the subscribe button. If you get to the end of this video and you did not think it was worth your time, or you have not learned something new, then feel free to unsubscribe. No hard feelings. But if you give me your time and your attention, I will give you everything I have learned from over a decade in medicine. So please help me out. Hit the subscribe button to help this channel reach more people like you. And let us continue with the video. Before we get into the 8 habits, we need to understand what actually kills people in the developed world and why it happens earlier than it should. Because the habits of people who live past 90 are not random. They are targeted very specifically at the biological processes that cause early death. There are 4 primary pathways through which the modern body ages too fast. The first is chronic low-grade inflammation, a persistent, low-level activation of your immune system that damages blood vessel walls, brain tissue, and organ function over decades. This is different from acute inflammation, which heals injuries. Chronic inflammation is the opposite. It destroys healthy tissue slowly and silently. The second pathway is mitochondrial decline. Your mitochondria are the energy-generating structures inside every cell in your body. As they become damaged or fewer in number, your cells produce less energy, recover more slowly, and eventually stop functioning properly. This is the cellular basis of aging. The third pathway is insulin resistance, a state in which your cells stop responding normally to insulin, which forces your pancreas to produce more and more of it to achieve the same effect. Chronically elevated insulin damages blood vessels, promotes fat storage around organs, drives inflammation, and accelerates cognitive decline. These 3 pathways, inflammation, mitochondrial decline, and insulin resistance, are the biological engines of premature aging. And the eighth habit addresses something even deeper, which we will come to. What is remarkable about nonagenarians, people in their 90s and beyond, is not that they avoided these processes entirely. It is that they slowed them down dramatically, often through behaviors they adopted decades earlier without fully understanding why they worked. The conventional understanding of longevity focuses on avoiding obvious risks: smoking, heavy drinking, extreme obesity, and yes, those matter enormously. But the research on people who live past 90 consistently shows something more specific. It is not just the absence of bad habits, it is the presence of particular biological behaviors that actively counteract the aging machinery. Research published in The Lancet has tracked the health trajectories of populations with exceptionally high rates of centenarians, the Okinawans of Japan, the Sardinians of Italy, the Seventh-day Adventists of Loma Linda, California. What these groups share is not a single food or a single behavior. They share a cluster of overlapping habits that each work through distinct biological mechanisms. That cluster is what we are going to take apart today, habit by habit, mechanism by mechanism. Habit 1, they move their body every single day, but not how you think. The first habit of people who live past 90 is daily physical movement. But here is where the conventional picture gets it wrong. The research does not show that these people spent their lives doing intense gym workouts. In many of the longest-lived populations, structured exercise as we understand it barely exists. What exists instead is low to moderate movement that is woven into daily life: walking, gardening, gentle manual work, stairs instead of lifts. The mechanism behind why this works is fascinating. Sustained low-intensity movement stimulates a process called mitochondrial biogenesis, the creation of new mitochondria inside muscle cells. Every time you take a sustained walk, your body senses the energy demand and responds by building more energy-generating infrastructure at the cellular level. Over months and years, this keeps your cellular energy output high, your muscle tissue metabolically active, and your resting inflammatory markers low. Research published in Cell Metabolism has shown that regular movement, even moderate walking, upregulates a protein called PGC1 alpha, which essentially acts as the master switch for mitochondrial production. Think of it like maintaining a power plant. If you let the equipment sit idle for years, it corrodes. If you use it regularly, it stays functional and gradually improves. Movement is not just about burning calories, it is about maintaining the energy infrastructure of every cell in your body. The practical implication is that the people who live past 90 did not need to run marathons. They needed to never stop moving, even modestly, for decades. The second habit is caloric moderation, but with a specific mechanism that most people have never heard about. In Okinawan culture, this practice is called hara hachi bo, which roughly translates to eating until you are 80% full. It sounds like simple portion control. Biologically, it is something much more profound. When you consistently eat slightly below your maximum caloric capacity, you activate a cellular stress response pathway called mTOR downregulation. mTOR, mechanistic target of rapamycin, is a signaling molecule that controls whether cells are in growth mode or maintenance mode. When food is abundant, mTOR is constantly activated. Cells prioritize growth and reproduction. When mTOR is periodically downregulated through modest caloric restriction, cells shift into repair mode, clearing out damaged proteins, repairing DNA, and disposing of dysfunctional cellular components through a process called autophagy. Autophagy, which translates literally as self-eating, is your body's cellular housekeeping system. Research published in Nature has demonstrated that regular autophagy activation is one of the most powerful anti-aging mechanisms we know about. It is how your body removes the cellular debris that accumulates with age and eventually drives inflammation and organ dysfunction. Eating a little less, consistently, for decades is not about weight. It is about keeping your cellular cleanup system active. The people who live past 90 rarely describe themselves as dieters. They simply never developed the habit of eating past the point of satisfaction. That subtle lifelong pattern of modest restraint at mealtimes has extraordinary consequences at the cellular level. The third habit is one that does not show up in nutrition research or fitness studies. It shows up in sociology and psychology research, and it is one of the most striking findings in the entire longevity literature. People who live past 90 almost universally have what researchers call a sense of purpose, a clear, felt reason why they are needed in the world. In Japanese culture, this concept is called ikigai, your reason for being. Research published in JAMA has found that people with a strong sense of purpose have significantly lower rates of cardiovascular disease, cognitive decline, and all-cause mortality. The effect size is comparable to not smoking. The biological mechanism involves the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, the system that regulates your body's stress response. In people with a clear sense of purpose, this system maintains a healthier baseline, producing less chronic cortisol. Chronic cortisol elevation drives inflammation, damages the hippocampus, the brain structure most associated with memory, and accelerates the dysfunction of nearly every organ system in the body. Purpose is not a luxury, it is a biological regulator of how quickly your body ages. The people who live past 90 are not waiting for retirement to mean something. They have roles in families, in communities, in creative work that give every day a reason to continue. That sense of mattering to others appears to switch off something in the stress response that over decades makes an extraordinary difference to physical health. The fourth habit is sleep, but understood not as rest, but as active biological maintenance. During deep sleep, your body does things it cannot do while you are awake. Your brain activates a waste clearance system called the glymphatic system, which flushes out metabolic byproducts that accumulate during waking hours, including amyloid beta, the protein associated with Alzheimer's disease. Your cardiovascular system gets its lowest pressure period of the day, allowing blood vessel walls to recover. Your hormonal system resets, growth hormone is released, cortisol falls to its minimum, and the cellular repair signals that govern tissue maintenance are strongest during deep slow-wave sleep. Research published in Science has shown that even a single night of disrupted sleep measurably increases amyloid accumulation in the brain. Decades of poor sleep, therefore, is not just about feeling tired, it is about progressive neurological damage that manifests as cognitive decline in later life. Sleep is when your body performs maintenance that cannot be done any other way. Cutting it short is like skipping every service interval on a car for 30 years. The people who live past 90 typically maintain consistent sleep schedules, prioritize darkness and quiet in their sleeping environment, and do not treat sleep as something to be optimized away. They sleep 7 to 9 hours because their bodies were built to require it. And honoring that requirement decade after decade keeps their brains and cardiovascular systems in a fundamentally different biological state than people who chronically undersleep. And just really quickly, if you are getting some value from this video so far, please consider subscribing to the channel. It really helps these videos reach more people who need this information. Anyway, let us continue. The fifth habit is one that gets mentioned in wellness content, but rarely with the biological depth it deserves. People who live past 90 almost universally maintain strong, meaningful social connections throughout their lives, not superficial acquaintances, but relationships involving genuine mutual support, shared history, and emotional intimacy. The biological mechanism behind this is more direct than most people realize. Research published in PLOS Medicine found that social isolation has a mortality risk equivalent to smoking 15 cigarettes a day. The mechanism involves inflammatory signaling. Isolated individuals show chronically elevated levels of interleukin-6 and C-reactive protein, two of the most sensitive markers of systemic inflammation we measure in clinical medicine. Loneliness activates what researchers call the conserved transcriptional response to adversity, a gene expression pattern originally evolved for physical threat, which upregulates inflammation and downregulates antiviral immunity. It is a response designed for short-term danger, and it is devastating when it runs chronically for years. Social connection is not a soft benefit. It is a direct regulator of your inflammatory biology. The people who live past 90 are embedded in communities, families, and social structures that keep them actively needed and actively loved. They do not retire from human connection when they retire from work. And that continued relational engagement appears to keep their inflammatory biology in a state that extends both lifespan and cognitive function. Habit 6. They eat predominantly whole, unprocessed food. The sixth habit is dietary quality. But again, the mechanism is more specific than most people appreciate. People who live past 90 do not follow a single named diet. Okinawans eat sweet potato and tofu. Sardinians eat beans and sourdough. Loma Linda Adventists eat nuts and legumes. What they share is not a cuisine, it is the near-complete absence of ultra-processed food from their daily lives. Ultra-processed foods, anything manufactured with emulsifiers, modified starches, artificial flavorings, and industrial seed oils, are not just nutritionally empty. They actively disrupt gut microbiome composition, promote endotoxemia, the leakage of bacterial fragments from the gut into the bloodstream, and drive the kind of chronic systemic inflammation that accelerates every aging pathway we discussed earlier. Research published in the British Medical Journal found that every 10% increase in ultra-processed food consumption was associated with a 14% increase in all-cause mortality. The mechanism is not just caloric or metabolic, it is inflammatory and microbiome mediated. Whole food is not just food with more nutrients, it is food that does not actively damage your gut lining, your microbiome, and your inflammatory baseline. The nonagenarians we study did not eat whole food because they were health conscious in the modern sense. They ate whole food because that was what was available to them. Their food systems were not industrialized, and that near-accidental protection from ultra-processed food across their entire lives may be one of the single most important variables separating their biology from the population at large. The seventh habit is stress management, but not through the self-help framework of relaxation techniques. What the research on long-lived populations consistently shows is that these individuals do not have less stress than people in the developed world. They have better biological frameworks for metabolizing it. In Sardinia, men in their 80s and 90s gather in the afternoon for what is essentially a daily debriefing conversation, laughter, shared wine, and the ritual of ending the working day together. In Okinawa, elderly women maintain moai, small groups of 5 or so lifelong friends who meet regularly and serve as each other's financial and emotional safety net. In Loma Linda, the Adventist Sabbath creates a weekly enforced period of rest, community, and deliberate disengagement from commercial activity. What all of these share is a biological function. They periodically and reliably downregulate the sympathetic nervous system, the fight or flight arm of your autonomic nervous system that, when chronically activated, drives cortisol elevation, endothelial dysfunction, and cardiovascular damage. Research published in Psychosomatic Medicine has found that regular social ritual reduces allostatic load, the cumulative physiological wear that chronic stress inflicts on the body. Ritual is not culture for its own sake. It is a biological reset mechanism that the longest-lived populations have built into their daily architecture. The people who live past 90 do not need yoga retreats or mindfulness apps because they never lost access to the stress regulation structures that human biology was designed to use. Community, ritual, and regular permission to stop. Habit 8. They maintain muscle mass through the second half of life. The eighth habit is the one most underappreciated by the medical establishment, and in my experience in emergency medicine, it is the one most directly correlated with who walks out of the hospital and who does not. People who live past 90 maintain meaningful muscle mass well into their 70s and 80s. Not elite athlete muscle, functional muscle, the kind that lets you get up from a chair without using your arms, carry your own groceries, and recover from illness without total deconditioning. The mechanism here operates on multiple levels. Muscle tissue is the largest insulin-sensitive organ in the body. Adequate muscle mass means your cells absorb glucose efficiently without requiring excessive insulin. which keeps insulin resistance at bay and reduces its downstream damage to blood vessels and the brain. Muscle also functions as what researchers call a secretory organ. It releases anti-inflammatory myokines, including a molecule called irisin, which crosses the blood-brain barrier and has been shown in research published in Nature Medicine to stimulate the production of brain-derived neurotrophic factor, or BDNF. BDNF is essentially fertilizer for your brain cells. It supports the growth of new neurons, the maintenance of existing ones, and the strength of synaptic connections. People with higher muscle mass have higher BDNF levels. People with higher BDNF levels have dramatically lower rates of dementia. Muscle is not just about strength. It is a metabolic organ, an anti-inflammatory factory, and a direct driver of brain health. Losing it in your 60s and 70s is not just a physical decline, it is a neurological one. The people who live past 90 maintained muscle, not through heroic gym programs, but through decades of consistent physical engagement, carrying things, walking hills, doing physical work around the home. That sustained mechanical loading of muscle tissue kept the metabolic and neurological benefits active throughout the second half of their lives. So what is the solution? I want to frame this carefully because I am not advocating for a complete life overhaul starting tomorrow. I am not suggesting you need to relocate to Sardinia or adopt a religious practice or quit your current lifestyle wholesale. And I am certainly not suggesting that any of this replaces working with your own doctor on specific medical conditions. What I am saying is that if you want to give yourself the best biological chance of living past 90, with your mind, your independence, and your relationships intact, then these 8 habits are where the evidence points. And the most important thing to understand is that they work cumulatively and over time. You are not looking for a dramatic change this week. You are looking to shift your daily biology in a direction that compounds over decades. The first and most accessible entry point is movement, not a gym membership. A daily walk, 30 minutes of sustained movement, every day activates mitochondrial biogenesis, reduces inflammatory markers, and improves insulin sensitivity in ways that begin showing measurable effect within weeks. Research published in the New England Journal of Medicine found that regular moderate walking reduced all-cause mortality by more than 30% compared to sedentary controls. That is a number comparable to quitting smoking. The second lever is food quality, specifically reducing your exposure to ultra-processed food. You do not need to be perfect, but shifting the balance of your diet toward whole foods, vegetables, legumes, unprocessed proteins, whole grains removes the primary driver of chronic gut inflammation and begins the process of restoring microbiome diversity, which supports both immune function and metabolic health. The third lever is sleep. If you are consistently sleeping fewer than 7 hours, or if your sleep is frequently fragmented, that is worth taking seriously. Sleep hygiene, consistent bedtimes, a cool and dark environment, avoiding bright screens in the final hour before bed is genuinely effective, and the research behind it is robust. The fourth lever is social engagement. This one requires honest reflection for many people, particularly men in middle age who have let friendships atrophy. The evidence is clear enough that I would put rebuilding or maintaining close social relationships at roughly the same priority level as exercise for long-term health outcomes. And the fifth lever, the one I would most strongly urge anyone over 50 to take seriously, is maintaining or building muscle mass. Not for appearance, for metabolic function, brain health, and physical resilience. Resistance training 2 to 3 times per week, combined with adequate protein intake, is the most direct way to counteract the sarcopenia, the age-related muscle loss that otherwise progressively erodes every system in the body. I want to be very clear that I am not suggesting anyone stop taking medication or change a treatment plan without speaking to their doctor first. That is not something I would ever recommend. But what I am saying is that these habits and medical treatment are not in opposition, they work better together. A patient who is moving regularly, sleeping well, eating whole food, and maintaining muscle mass will almost certainly respond better to medical treatment because the underlying biological environment is healthier. Let me bring this back to what I see clinically, because I think it genuinely helps to ground this science in real patient outcomes. The patients I see in emergency medicine who are in their late 80s and early 90s and still walking in, not being brought in on a trolley, but walking in with a relatively minor complaint, share a profile that is remarkably consistent. They are lean without being frail, their hands have grip strength. They live with someone or in close proximity to family or friends. When you take their history, they describe decades of modest physical activity, not extreme sport. They tend to eat simply, they sleep. And almost universally, they describe a life in which they felt needed. Contrast that with the patients I see who are in their late 60s and early 70s, already experiencing the functional decline that should not come until much later. What you find in that group, over and over, is the convergence of the risk factors that map directly onto the missing habits, sedentary behavior that allowed muscle mass to fall away, ultra-processed food patterns that drove systemic inflammation, disrupted sleep that damaged the brain's maintenance cycles, social isolation that kept the inflammatory response chronically elevated. What is remarkable, and what I find genuinely moving to witness, is how quickly biology can shift when those patterns change. I have seen patients begin a walking program and a resistance training routine in their mid-60s and come back months later with metabolic markers that look a decade younger. That is not a placebo effect. That is mitochondrial biogenesis, insulin sensitivity improving, and inflammatory signaling downregulating. The body is extraordinarily responsive to the right inputs, even late in life. Living past 90 is not just about longevity as a number. It is about what that decade offers, who you still are, what you can still do, who you can still be there for. The biology of extreme longevity is not separate from the biology of a good life at 70 or 75. The same habits that extend lifespan are the ones that preserve cognitive clarity, physical independence, and the capacity for genuine relationship. What is less well appreciated is that the mechanisms driving premature aging, chronic inflammation, insulin resistance, mitochondrial decline, cortisol dysregulation are the same mechanisms driving the most common forms of dementia, cardiovascular disease, and metabolic illness. These are not separate conditions that happen to appear together by coincidence. They are different expressions of the same underlying biological dysfunction. When you address the root causes through the habits we have discussed today, you are not just adding years. You are fundamentally changing what kind of years those will be. That is the real prize here, not just reaching 90, but reaching 90 as someone who still has things to do and people to do them for. So let me bring this full circle. Living past 90 does not happen by accident for most people, and it does not happen through genetics alone. It happens when the biology of aging is slowed at its source, through movement that maintains cellular energy infrastructure, through dietary moderation that keeps cellular cleanup active, through purpose and connection that regulate the stress response, through sleep that allows the brain to clear its own waste, through muscle that keeps metabolism and cognition intact. None of these habits require perfection. None of them require extreme sacrifice. What they require is consistency. The kind of quiet, undramatic, decade-long commitment to basic biological inputs that the longest-lived people on Earth practiced not as a health regime, but simply as a way of life. The system did not teach you these mechanisms. The wellness industry sells you complexity when the science points towards simplicity. But now you know the why behind every one of these habits, and the why is what makes the what sustainable. If you found this video useful, please subscribe to the channel and help us reach more people who need this information.